The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
I had applied for the RCMP out of high school. However, I didn't have grade 12, and one of the member at the detachment said, "Oh, finish your high school and then come and see us." Well, I didn't want to go back to school, so I joined the Air Force. And I ended up in training in Quebec, and as a result of the training, I got sent to Comox, British Columbia. And then the Air Force was okay, but it wasn't for me, and I went to Teachers College. That wasn't for me. And then I decided, I'm going to try the Mounted Police again, and they took me in. So that was in Halifax, and I grew up, of course, in Nova Scotia, in Westville, Nova Scotia. And anyway, off I went to Regina. I drove. One of the other guys from Antigonish, he and I drove out. I had a little Volkswagen, and away we went. And arrived at depot. I hardly remember coming to depot, but it wasn't unusual because I'd already lived in barracks and with a bunch of guys and having the Air Force experience. So yeah, depot was a little different than the Air Force, but in some ways it was easier, in some ways it was harder. The life here was not that hard, but you were busy, from dark until dark, it seemed, because it was through the winter. Anyway, after that, we rode the horses at that time, 1965. We were still riding horses, and of course, the horses left the training in 1966. So we had our full stint with horses, which was great. I didn't mind them. In fact, I enjoyed the horses. Stables was another story, but that's the way it goes. And at the end of training, training was 8 months at that time. However, they were cutting back to 6. Therefore, we trained for 7 months. And so I think it was, the end of March, early April, I was off to Toronto. I was told, "Oh, you're going to Toronto, you're going to be a detective." What? Anyway, I arrived in Toronto. Again, driving. And of course, in those days, you had to meet the commanding officer in Red Surge. However, he happened to be away somewhere, wherever he was, no one told it. So we sat around for about 2 or 3 days in Red Surge, waiting for the commanding officer to show up. Finally, we got shown into his office, and it was Chief Superintendent Fitzsimmons at the time, later became deputy. And very cheerful and nice man, and made us feel very welcome. The little talk lasted about 2 minutes, and that was it. We were gone. Anyway, after Toronto Town Station on 3 Beverly Street. It's an old warehouse, I think. I don't remember doing a whole lot of things there. It was income tax service of summons and getting to know the city. That was the big thing. Get to know Toronto. Well, shortly after that, I was transferred out to then Toronto International Airport. It's now called Pearson Airport. But I was there for about a year. And all of a sudden, someone had knowledge, or I must have reported it somehow, that I had Air Force experience in telecommunications. And next thing I know, I was back down in the city of Toronto on subdivision with the telex and radio and that sort of thing. And I was only there about a couple of months, and now it's 1967, Expo's on in Montreal. So they were requiring telecommunications experience in Ottawa, headquarters. So off I go to Ottawa. And I was in telecoms there for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I liked Ottawa, but I still hadn't done anything in police work. And here 5 years have gone by. So I asked during an interview, can you send me out to a contract division? And they weren't sending folks back to your home province, so which is Nova Scotia. So I said, well, send me west to Alberta. So next thing I knew, I was transferred to Portage-la-Prairie, Manitoba. So I was in Portage about 4 years, Portage Rural Detachment, Portage City Detachment, and I really enjoyed it. I think it was, I won't say the best of my times, but I really enjoyed it at Portage. There was a plainclothes unit in Portage as well. And after, I think about 3 or 4 years, I was on the plainclothes unit. And it was one person, plainclothes unit. And there was some interesting investigations there because you're not in uniform and you're doing things that, well, you're still investigating, but it was very interesting. I did more of the serious stuff there. There was a series of phone calls that somebody was making. Actually, it seemed to be 2 people that were making, not threatening, but the harassing phone calls. And we didn't have the equipment at that time to put on phones or anything. At least we didn't have it in Portage, and I wasn't aware of it. However, we're getting a lot of complaints, and people, it's not very nice. But anyway, I had a friend who worked for Manitoba Telephones, and I was talking to him. He said, well, look, I can help you, but you can't go to court with anything I said, because I said, that's fine. All we want to do is stop them. He said, okay, tell your folks that if they get a phone call, don't hang up, but let me know. I would let him know. And he would tell me or where the phone call came from. Pardon me. And that happened. So I went out and talked to the people and told them the phone calls, we know they're coming from this phone, they have to cease, and that type of thing. But I remember the gentleman who owned the residence was very upset with me and said a lot of nasty things. And I said, just don't make any more phone calls. I don't know who's making them, but just don't make any more. About a week later, he came to the office and he said, I apologize for what I was saying. Could you come out to the car? I went out to the car, and it was his son that was making the calls. And his son was a paraplegic. I felt so quite badly. Anyway, the phone call stopped, but I can still see that poor guy. Anyway, move on from Portage, I was transferred up to Roblin. In fact, they told me, you're going to be promoted and we're going to move you to Riding Mountain or Roblin or somewhere else. And I said, the only place I knew was Riding Mountain. I said, oh, okay, I'll go there. Anyway, the transfer came out, it was Roblin. Well, I was sure glad it was Roblin and not Riding Mountain. So I was there. By this time, we had 3 children. They're all under the age of 3, I think. There's a set of twins, so that kept us busy. So off we go to Roblin. I was only there a year and a half. Detachment goes up from a corporal's to a sergeant's detachment. Well, you're not going to get it, Cunningham. You just got here. So off I go to Norway House. And so that was 2 years in Norway House Detachment. That was an isolated post in northern Manitoba. As a matter of fact, I volunteer at the Heritage Centre. The bombardier that's in the Heritage Centre I used on Norway House Detachment. It was there, and I was sure glad to see it back here, and it all refurbished, painted up, and it looks great. It was a large detachment because Norway House served many other communities. Island Lake, Oxford House, God's Lake, Cross Lake, and there's some others that I probably can't remember right now. So we would send members on a weekly basis from Norway House. They would fly into these other locales, and they would be there for a week or several days, dropped off by plane, and then they would be picked up at such and such a time, usually a fixed time, a week or whatever it was. My area was Norway House itself and God's Lake. And God's Lake was an hour-and-a-half flight out of northeast of Norway House. Island Lake was even a bit further, but I didn't do Island Lake. But these were isolated communities, Aboriginal reserves and Métis communities. And they were all built on water, or not on water, but next to water, either on a lake or a river or whatever. So all your transportation was either on foot or in a boat, or in winter on a skidoo. I went to God's Lake. We had a beautiful 14 by 60 foot trailer to live in, but we didn't have any water. We didn't have any washrooms because there was no water hooked up. And we had a patrol cabin that we used as an office, and there was a cell in the patrol cabin. It was a very small thing. It was just a cell in a small area for a little office. And there was usually a band constable that would help us out, you know, try to find, oh, you're looking for a so-and-so person. Well, oh yeah, I know where they live. So it aided that way. Norway House itself was, there was about a population of 2,500 at that time. I think it's even much larger now. But it was, at least we had trucks that we drove there. Again, the houses were all built next to the river because prior to the streets or the roads, everybody went by boat or walked. It was an eye-opener, that's for sure. I mean, I had worked in Portage la Prairie. There was certainly Aboriginals there in the Long Plain Indian Reserve at Portage. And then into Roblin, there was another reserve up there. But Norway House was totally different. It's like any other community. There's folks that are excellent to get along with, and the cooperation is great, and there's other folks that aren't. The magistrate was, her name was Jean Folster, and a great lady. She was, I think, the first female chief, I'm going to say in Canada, but if not in Canada, at least in Manitoba. And she was our magistrate, not a justice of the peace. She was a magistrate. She was also a great cook. And I remember going over to get some documents signed, and she was in the middle of baking, and she had flour goodies all over the place. And she said, "What have you got, Corporal?" So I explained what I had. Oh, okay. So she just swept everything aside and signed everything up. So, but anyway, Jean was a very easygoing lady until she put on her magistrate's hat, so to speak, and then she was all business. But anyway, we all got along with Jean. Norway House. Then I went into Winnipeg to General Investigation Section on major crime. It was, of course, sudden deaths, murders, sexual assault, any serious assault. And we also assisted detachments in their investigations. That was a big part of it. Postmortems. A lot of the postmortems were all done in Winnipeg. The remains would come into Winnipeg to Health Sciences, and we would assist the member coming in from another detachment. So I certainly saw my share of postmortems and so forth. One investigation that always comes back to me, this was after Winnipeg. I was transferred down to Emerson. That's right on the border with North Dakota. Emerson Detachment. I was promoted to sergeant there. Oh, it was in the winter. I can't remember. Probably 1986. At a small town east of Emerson, it was a credit union. It was about an hour's drive away. It was a bank robbery, an armed robbery. I'd never been involved in an armed robbery before. Our communications at the time was so poor that we couldn't communicate with our car out there. At times we could, at times we couldn't. So St. Pierre Detachment was closer, and they would relay the communications. But anyway, to make a long story short, it was three men out of Winnipeg come down in a stolen truck, kind of roughed up the staff and made off with some money. By the time we get the notification, we're an hour away. We get out there and, you start your interviews, and now we're looking for a truck because we had a description. Well, the truck was located, and they tried to run the truck into a pasture in the wintertime, It was a big four-wheel drive thing, and it probably might have made it. However, they didn't realize that in the gate, covered in snow, was a huge boulder. And they drove the truck right up on top of the boulder, and of course there's a truck. So they had a snowmobile, so they all somehow got on that snowmobile and took off. In the meantime, we had lots of radio coverage about the description of the men, what was going on. And all of a sudden, a lady phoned. She said, you know, I was just talking to my mother in such and such an area. She's acting awfully suspicious. And I think, I heard about this robbery. I think they may even be there. So we got the location, and the nearest car happened to be our unmarked car. So they roll up into this person's yard, and out runs these two men, thinking it was the taxi they had just ordered, right into the arms of two RCMP constables. And of course, they were arrested. They fit the description right off the bat, and not only that, they had walked from a field. So while members were looking after these two, myself and another fellow, we had to hire out some skidoos, and away we went, following the tracks, about a kilometer away, and under a pile of brush, we could follow the tracks right to the brush, we found a gunny sack full of cash. And as it turned out, it turned out to be the money from the credit union. But if it wasn't for the lady and her daughter's conversation on the phone, we might never have found them. So obviously, you talk about help. There was excellent help. And it turned out all three were convicted. We ended up with those two, and then we found the other third person later on, and they're all convicted of armed robbery. So it was excellent. No one really got hurt, but I never forgot that lady for calling in and saying, hey, I think something's wrong with my mom. She's acting awfully suspicious. So from Emerson, I go back to Winnipeg in what they called planning branch at the time. I have no idea what it might be now, but we were kind of not under the thumb, but right next door to the commanding officer, and we did a lot of work on projects that came out of his office, not staffing, but just planning for the division. And then shortly after that, I was there about 3 years, and then that was okay for a while. It was kind of interesting work, but I got into the criminal operations side, and then shortly after that, I was told I was commissioned, and I was sent to Regina Subdivision. That's the assistant officer. And that was really enjoyable. I worked with a great bunch of people, and Regina Subdivision was huge. Even I was looking after the plainclothes units and doing some of the, I call them audits or inspections, whatever you want to call them. And shortly after that, within a year, our first group of RCMP members went overseas with the UN. And one of the guys from Yorkton, the officer commanding in Yorkton, was one of the fellows that go in that first group. So with him gone, the commanding officer said, well, we need somebody in Yorkton. You're going. So I was gone to Yorkton while he was in Namibia. So that was a great experience. And then after 6 months, I was back in Regina. Next thing I know, I was in audit. I was the first full-time audit officer in F Division, or Saskatchewan. So I was on audit for 3 years. And then went over to the criminal operations side as the criminal intelligence officer, and I had 2 or 3 jobs on that side. And at my retirement, it was really the federal policing officer. At the time we were downsizing, the whole force was downsizing. It was not a pleasant time to be in the force, from my perspective, because we were telling people, you don't have a job anymore, or your job now is over here, or whatever. And some people were given what they called the package and said, okay, if you leave, you get a certain buyout package or whatever. So it wasn't, to me anyway, it wasn't a pleasant time. I didn't enjoy that at all. But anyway, I had been offered a couple of transfers to outside the province, probably for a promotion, but I was coming to the end of my career. I had 3 daughters in university at the time, and my wife was working here in Regina, and I thought, my goodness, start counting things up. I don't know if I'm going to be any better off. So anyway, I remained here, and I retired in 1997, and then I had paid back the pension from the Air Force, which was about 3 years, so that gave me a full pension of 35 years. And I was kind of, you have these feelings about leaving the force, but once the break was made, it was okay, but it took a while to, you never leave it. I still enjoy the RCMP, and I like its history. And my wife says, well, you're not a policeman anymore, so you're always seeing, doing, whatever. And yeah, you got to realize that, but it's when you leave, you're almost like, you're not leaving home, but you're leaving something. And it's that association, I guess, with what you were. So I worked for 5 years after that with the provincial government, and then I retired fully. But then in 2007, when the Heritage Centre opened, they were asking for veterans to volunteer. So I said, well, sure, what do you want me to do? So they had a little thing written up and picked a time. They said, well, how about Friday afternoons? Would you come up? Oh, yeah, sure. So I've been here ever since at the Heritage Centre. And at the time, we weren't doing guiding, but it turned out that we do that now, and I enjoy that. I just love to do that. I get a chance to, I like the history, like I said, I like the history of the force, and I like to go through it and talk about it. And I mean, I don't know, I know a little bit, but man, there's over 135 years of history. But I guess as you get older, you realize that the Western Canada, the Mounted Police were really the people who made it, not assisted, I guess, but they were here long before the settlers came, and what they went through. And then, of course, there's all kinds of stories like that of what members have gone through and so forth. And even in my time, I go back and I think, I enjoyed working in Norway House Detachment, but you put your family through a lot. Like, fortunately, they started school there, but they were all just in kindergarten or grade 1. Of all the jobs I had from leaving high school, and I had a raft of jobs, I would never turn back and say, I'm sorry I joined the Mounted Police. I enjoyed every day, well, almost every day. Some days you wonder, what am I doing here? But it was many days you never knew what was going to happen, and it could be an adventure or it could be something very sad, but it was enjoyable work. And I was interested in it, and no, I wouldn't trade it for anything.